All right, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining me today. We're going to get started now with the Thrift Savings Plan updates and overview. My name is Randy Urban, and I am a TSP Training and Liaison Specialist here at the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board. And if you're not familiar with that, that's the agency that oversees the Thrift Savings Plan. That's our sole purpose, is to oversee the plan. Just a quick little disclaimer here. I won't read it word for word to you, but I work as a part, like I said, as a part of the Education and Outreach Division here at the FRTIB, which is the agency that oversees Thrift Savings Plan. And the presentations are intended for educational purposes only and should not replace independent professional judgment. In other words, we can't endorse third parties, products, services. I can't give advice. My job is to educate and inform and help you understand the plan. And in this case, if you're an HR, payroll specialist, something along those lines, just different aspects of the plans. Of course, today we're going to be focusing on updates, recent updates. We're going to also focus on so some things that happen. Quite a bit has been happening over the year. Let me see, that didn't change. Oh, that did change. But we'll also get into some features of the plan that I guess the next 5 or 6 bullets you see right there are more items that are leaning towards early to mid-career participants. But of course, this is all still good information for anyone active into the end of their career. So it's all still good information for everyone. So we're going to talk about contribution limits. We'll get into the differences between Roth and traditional. We do a lot of events, a lot of webinars and so forth that participants still have a little bit to learn there, here and there. And then we'll talk about the funds. That's something that really perks everyone's interest. I can't give advice in that area, though. Keep that in mind. I can let you know how the funds work, the purpose of the L funds, the Lifecycle funds, and throw out things like terms like time horizon and target date. The L funds are target date funds, and they do realign as you go along towards your time horizon. So we're going to get into all those areas, and we're also going to talk about the cost of the plan, and then some resources that participants can follow up with, or anyone can follow up with, to get more information about the plan and assistance, call centers, and so forth. So the agenda will include, like I said, updates, contributions, traditional and Roth, the funds, investments, the funds, investing in the plan, and resources. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the recent changes over the last year or so. One of the biggest ones being the catch-up contribution process. If you're not aware, we did implement a new process this year, and now participants only have to make one election when they elect to contribute, and that includes both the $19,500, the elected deferral, and the $6,500 for the catch-up contributions this year. So if a participant is eligible for catch-up contributions, meaning they're in the year they're going to turn 50 or older this year going forward, they no longer have to make separate elections. They no longer have to re-elect it come the next year. And one of the biggest changes will be that the catch-up contributions will be used for matching. So in other words, a quick scenario, if you will, if a participant is contributing $1,000 a month, $1,000 a pay period, and let's just say they're on a 26 pay period schedule. How convenient is that for this year? So the total of $19,500 and the $6,500 is $26,000. So once they reach the $19,500 and they continue those contributions, so they'll have to continue contributing, of course, that will start to fill up the catch-up portion of their account. And those contributions in those latter pay periods at the end of the year will be used for determining the level of catch-up contributions. The contributions, the level of agency and service matching. So the agency and service match will still go to the traditional side of things, but it will include both, of course, any Roth or traditional contributions to determine the amounts. So that's a pretty big change that we implemented starting this year. We have greatly expanded, as it says there, our webinar, and I call them courses still. Some folks want to call them webinars, but what we did was starting in 2021, we started offering our longer 2.5 or 4 hour courses as webinars, in addition to the full schedule of 1 hour webinars. So we're doing a lot of that this year, and we'll see when we actually get back to live events. That's sort of up in the air right now, determining when we'll fully get back to that or what that will look like when we get back into the swing of things of travel and so forth. The current schedule, of course, is on our website at tsb.gov/webinars. We update that almost monthly right now. Sometimes it's every 2 months or so, but almost every month. We just put up additional September dates. So through September, there's available dates that participants can join. It's open to the public, and we do use WebEx as our platform currently. We are sort of looking at using Teams sometime in the future in addition to WebEx, but right now the platform that we use is, of course, WebEx. We implemented the 5-year increments for L funds last July. So we now have a total of 15 funds, 10 of those being L funds. So now participants can more accurately target their target date by looking at the 5 years. So now they go all the way out to the year 2065. So the L 2065. There's also part of this is making those funds a little bit more aggressive as we move forward. So there's now 10 L funds, including the L income fund, which is for folks that are using the funds right now. They're already or they may within the next 6 to 12 months. So that starts with the 2025 all the way out to 2065. If you haven't been to our website lately, take a look at it. Go out and see at tsb.gov. We have redesigned the website completely. So a completely new look, feel, as it says there, and functionality. Takes some getting used to, but there's some pretty interesting ways, some new charts and things of that nature. We've improved the access to our training sections and that sort of stuff. So that's an ongoing process there, of course. 5% automatic enrollment. So October of last year, new participants who come into the plan beginning on October 1st of last year, now automatically enrolled at 5% instead of 3% like they were before. So that means they'll get their full match right off the bat. So that's a pretty big change also. And during the whole COVID changes and updates and things we've been trying to get on board, we also implemented the ability to upload forms online via a file. So when a participant goes into their account, they at tsb.gov, they'll see a list of tabs on the left-hand side, and down at the bottom, near the bottom, one of those tabs being how to upload forms as a file. So participants will now have a choice with some of our forms, not every single form. There's a drop-down box that will show the current list of TSP forms that we will accept as a file. Now, this still means that they have to print out forms, get signatures, proper signatures, and so forth. But in many cases, it's just a matter of going into their account and bringing up a form, filling out the form online, and then printing it up and just getting the signatures and scanning it as a file and submitting it that way. So that's another big change there for us. All right, so those are the list of changes that I'm going to focus on today. If anything else pops into my head, any smaller things out there that might have happened over the last year, quite a bit happened, as we all know, with the plan. And you can expect that we will have quite a bit happening over the next year and years to come, of course, with new vendors that we're bringing on board and so forth. So contributions. So have you looked at your contribution election recently? So, of course, we all know contributions come in through payroll deduction. Some participants often ask the question, can I just send in a personal check? Can I send in, can I contribute to my account that way? But Contributions only come in through payroll deduction. We have the new automatic enrollment, 5% for new participants. And some folks out there still use paper forms in some cases, but that's becoming more and more rare, of course, as we move more electronically with all this sort of stuff in the future. So if participants need to make changes, they'll have to contact that payroll system or use the form TSB1 or the U1 to change the percentage or the dollar figure of their contributions. So participant contributions, of course, continue unless the participants make a change, they stop their contributions, or they reach the IRS limits. And that's, that's part of what the intention behind the change to the catch-up contribution process is that you have participants making mistakes in how they were contributing on both sides and sometimes missing out on matching and not reaching limits and so forth. So this new streamlined process hopefully will make it easier. And as I mentioned earlier, let's just say the limits stay the same in 2022 at $26,000 total, and I'm putting $1,000 in a pay period, and I'm on a 26 pay period schedule. Well, that would be nice and convenient. I can just roll right into 2022, and my contributions continue, and I don't have to do anything or change anything. Now, if the limits increase next year, then of course I'd have to go in and adjust slightly for whatever those increases would be. But I would only have to make one election. Well, like I said, it will fill up the elected deferral amount first and then go on to the catch-up portion. How does the match work? Well, the match is the same, still the same. First 3% that I'm contributing. If I'm an agency or service member that a civilian or service member that is receiving matching, then the first 3% I contribute, I'll get matched 100%. The next 2% that I contribute, I will get matching on that dollar for dollar, or 50 cents on the dollar. So if I'm contributing 5%, then I'm going to get that 1% automatic and the agency or service matching of 4%, so a total of 10%. So agency and service contributions will always go to the traditional side of my account. They can be based off of, the matching can be based off of Roth and or traditional contributions. The automatic 1% just goes in automatically. There's nothing that I have to do for that. Now that's the only part, you see that middle column there, that requires vesting. For civilians, for most of us, it's 3 years of service. There are some positions that's only 2 years of service, Capitol Hill and some other positions, but most of us fit into that 3-year category. Our service members do require a 2-year vesting requirement under the BRS, the blended retirement system. So it's a 2 years of service. Now there's also some sort of waiting periods under BRS, as you can see there. The match and the 1% is received and eligible immediately under FERS or the Foreign Service Pension System. BRS, under BRS, the 1% automatic doesn't start for 60 days. And the matching is not going to start until 2 years of service. So look, sort of, if you've been around a long time, as I have been, and then you might recall the old days of FERS when there were some waiting periods and that sort of stuff. So it's so harken back to those days. So we'll see how long that lasts for this too. But the BRS does have a requirement for 60 days of service before the 1% starts. And then the BRS, the automatic, the matching doesn't start until 2 years of service. So the match, let me just move forward here. Let's go on to the limits. The limits, I'm going to show you 3 sets of limits here that are important for TSP participants. The first 2 are very common and widely understood. The third, the annual additions limit, is something that a lot of folks don't pay a lot of attention to. But right now, what we're looking at is the basic, the annual elected deferral limit of $19,500 for this year. Now, of course, all these limits that I'm discussing right now are set by IRS. We find out what those are going to be sometime in October of the previous year for the following year's limits. So $19,500 for the annual elective deferral, and that can be traditional and/or Roth contributions. And this is a question I get quite often. It does not include any agency or service contributions. This is going to be all participant contribution money here, not anything from an agency or service under that limit. And of course, if I'm eligible for catch-up contributions, there's the additional $6,500 this year. I don't have to be 50. I just have to be in the year I'm going to turn 50 in order to start the catch-up contributions. So I can start those at the beginning of the year, which was the old process. The new process will automatically fill out the elected deferral and then spill over into the catch-up portion, as I mentioned earlier. So you don't have to worry about, well, if you're eligible for catch-up, you're in the year you're going to turn 50 or older. And I think once again, and I went over these details just a moment ago, one of the biggest things to understand is the match is going to be based off of catch up in the latter periods of the year, pay periods of the year. There's a third limit that I often tell participants that if you're just FERS, if you don't have any outside plans you're participating in and it's just TSP, then you really don't have to worry about this number at all. If you're just a civilian and that's all you have, then the numbers will never add up. So what this includes, the 58,000, this applies to everyone, but I'll use myself as an example. I am just simply FERS, and my 19,500 plus the agency 1% and the match, those three totals cannot exceed the 58,000 for this year for me. So those numbers simply don't add up. So I'm not really going to worry about it so much. On the other hand, if I was a uniformed services member, then this number becomes a little bit more important to me, but I also have to be in a higher rank and higher salary and get some bonuses and things like that that I can include in here. So I often refer to this number as sort of an umbrella amount or a catch-all amount, but ironically, it does not include the catch-up contribution. So I try not to use that term anymore. But it includes, like I said, the 19,500, any matching 1%, any bonuses, special pay, incentive pay. See, service members can put in from incentive pay, special pay, and bonus pay, various types of pay that qualify for that as long as they have an election on file of at least 1%. So it gets a little bit trickier on that side of things. They've improved their systems when it comes to the EBIS system, or the not EBIS, MyPay, and what participants will see when they go in there as far as assisting them with what they can contribute as far as the percentages go in the different categories. But a lot of folks on that side you receive things like reenlistment bonuses, pilot pay. There's a new continuation bonus for the blended retirement system that folks can receive at 12 years of service. They can put that in. So there's various things that they can put in that would be included in this annual additions limit. Once again, I do want to stress that this does not include the 6,500 for catch-up contributions. All right, so we do have calculators, a few calculators on our website, and in fact, a total of 8. Actually, the very first one is going to take a participant out to the OPM Ballpark estimate calculator. The rest of those are specific to TSP, and one of those being how much can I contribute. So if you're looking to see how much you contribute to reach the limits, this is the calculator for you. If you think you're on a path to reach the limits too soon, then you want to go in and put the numbers in here. This is not very complicated calculator. It's just a few items that you put in, and it will give you feedback on what you should adjust. So if a participant at this point right now thinks that, hey, I'm putting too much in, I'm going to reach the limits too soon in the year, then they can go in and see what they should change it to for those catch-up for the contributions in total. And that's on our website, and you can just put in, for these things that I'm going to mention, like the calculators or any forms or anything like that, participant always just put in tsp.gov/calculators or tsp.gov/forms. It'll take them right to that section on our website. It's the easiest way to do it in my mind. So the more you contribute, the greater your TSP balance will be at retirement. If you hit your annual limits and stop for any reason, you no longer get the match. Now that's important, and I do want to stress that with the new process. It's one of my concerns with the new process is that participants might put in the $19,500 and think, well, I didn't really want to do this much as catch up, so I'll stop. But if they do something like that, and there's still remaining pay periods, of course, then that means they're not contributing. That means they're leaving matching on the table. So we don't want them to do that. They have to, at that point, they might want to at least consider just putting in at least 5% of their basic pay so that they can at least continue to get matching on those amounts. All right, so let's go into traditional and Roth a little bit here. Traditional, of course, is what you had all along up until we implemented Roth as a feature way back in 2012 and 2013. Folks came on board in different parts of those years. So now you have two options. So your contributions have to come in either as a traditional contribution or a Roth contribution. Traditional being that you're deferring pay into your TSP account. Now, service members could be putting tax exempt pay in here that won't be taxed, but the earnings would be taxed upon withdrawal. So traditional earnings will be taxed upon withdrawal. Roth contributions are where you can say, I'll pay the taxes up front. So I'm taking the tax hit now, and there's all kinds of different strategies out there for participants to consider, and you know what works for one may not work for another when it comes to deciding whether or not to use Roth as a feature in the plan and make Roth contributions. So, you know, they often refer to Roth as being more beneficial to someone that's younger because it gives them more time to build on the earnings, which we'll talk about in just a second. But there are also different strategies out there that some folks might be in a higher marginal tax rate, but still want to contribute as Roth. Maybe they think that the future tax rates have to go up and they're going to take advantage of whatever the rates are now, if that's their strategy. So it just depends. It depends on what a person's willing to take as far as a tax hit up front and what their plan or strategy is going forward. Now, one thing that affects everyone is the earnings on those Roth contributions can be tax-free, or what they call qualified earnings or qualified distributions. Now I say can be because you're looking at on the slide right now the two conditions that would make them qualified. So you pay the taxes on the Roth contribution itself up front. You're not going to pay taxes on that part again. So now we're talking about the earnings on those Roth contributions. The earnings can be considered qualified or tax-free if you have reached 5 years, so the 5-year rule, since your first contribution. Now, actually, the 5-year rule starts, as it says here, on January 1st of the year you make your first Roth contribution. So I could go in there later on this year and have never made any Roth contributions, start, and my Roth 5-year rule would have started way back on January 1st of this year. The other condition is the age of 59 and a half. This does apply to disability cases, permanent disability, and deceased participants. So I have to have both of these conditions met when I go to take my money out and I decide to withdraw from the Roth portion. So that's another actual change that happened, but not last year. Back in 2019, I can actually target the money in my account when it comes to withdrawals from either my traditional or my Roth contributions first. So I have options there. I don't have to stick to the old pro rata rule. But I do want to make sure that I have both of these conditions before I start touching my Roth so that I can have tax-free earnings. We get some questions every now and then. Participants wonder if I move money from other plans that's a Roth, because I can move money into TSP from a Roth, but only from a Roth employer plan like a 401k. And if the date on that one, say that was 5 years ago, and I've never put any Roth, and I start putting some Roth in this year, and then I go and transfer some money from that previous employer's plan, I will get the benefit of the older date from my 5-year rule. So that will transfer forward into TSP. Now, let me just make it perfectly clear. I cannot move a Roth IRA into your TSP. And that's not specific to TSP. Other employer plans have the same rule. You cannot move a Roth IRA into an employer plan. And just remember, TSP, of course, often mistakenly referred to as an IRA in some cases, but TSP, of course, is not an IRA, so therefore the Roth feature is not a Roth IRA in your TSP. It's a Roth, or basically Roth TSP. And if you decide to make Roth contributions and it doesn't work out for you and you don't want to continue, or whatever the case is, if you touch the money earlier, you could end up paying taxes on the earnings. But you could also, at some point, pay taxes, early withdrawal penalty on those earnings potentially too. So just keep in mind the taxes. That's the big thing. That's the big point behind Roth and traditional contributions. So speaking of Roth and Roth IRAs, that is, and your Roth and your TSP. Just want to reiterate what I said on some of the differences. One of the biggest differences, of course, is the income limits requirement in a Roth IRA. Roth IRAs require an income limit. Everyone in TSP who's eligible to contribute is eligible for Roth contributions, regardless of your income. Now, you can look over here just for example. The way this works is how you file your taxes and your adjusted gross income. So married filing joint this year, if your adjusted gross income is above $208,000, then you are not even eligible for a Roth IRA. If it's below $198,000, then you're fully eligible to contribute up to what is the other difference there, the $6,000 or $7,000 limit for a Roth IRA. If you fall somewhere in between there, it's a portion of the $6,000 or $7,000. So the two big differences here, of course, are the income limits and the amounts that you can contribute. And some of you may be wondering, well, can I do both? Can somebody do both? Yes. So there are plenty of participants, I'm quite sure, out there. I don't have any statistics. I don't know for a fact, but I'm just going to take a wild guess. With over 6 million participants, we probably have some folks out there that are maxing out both the $19,500 and a Roth IRA, or maybe even the $19,500, $6,500 as catch up, and a Roth IRA. And maybe all of that is Roth. That is doable. That is a possible thing. I'd love to know what those numbers are. If that's, I don't know if we could ever find out what those numbers would be, but I'm quite sure participants are doing that out there. So those are the main differences there, but you can, as long as the income limits don't get you there, contribute to both a Roth IRA outside of your TSP and as Roth contributions inside TSP. So once again, to change any contribution types, we talked about the amounts earlier, but of course, if you want to change the types, this is a question we get quite often also, is, where's this Roth TSP? Some folks really think about it as some separate account or something along those lines. The Roth in your TSP is the same account. It's just when you look at your statement and when you look at your account, there'll be a separate column for that. So it's the same account. So just like if you want to change the amount, dollar figure, percentage, or if you want to stop your contributions, well, the type can only be changed via your payroll office system. So whether you want to add Roth contributions or stop traditional or continue with both or whatever you want to do, you'll have to go to your payroll office system to make those decisions, or make those changes, I should say. So once again, remember, Roth is a tax decision that you make. TSP Roth is not a Roth IRA. And this is one of the areas where it gets a little confusing for some participants. The agency and service contributions are always going to go traditional, even if you're making only Roth contributions. And you think about that too. It's an agency or a service contribution. So the participant isn't making that contribution. The agency or service is. So who's going to be there to pay the taxes up front? That would be quite nice if they could do that for you, but they're not going to do that. So that means that those funds have to go in as traditional. But that's the confusing part, is that folks think that, well, that means they can't be based off of Roth, and that's not true. They can be based off of Roth contributions. All right, so I don't know how we're going to handle questions. We have a very large group here, looks like over 800. I'm going to open up the Q&A for just a bit here, and I'll try and grab some questions if folks want to submit those. Oops, maybe not. Right, so I'll leave the Q&A open right now, and if anybody wants to submit questions, I'll look over and grab some of those as we go along. And then we'll get into the funds a little bit here. So we've talked about contributions. We've talked about the types of contributions. Well, now where's that money going? What do I have to be able to invest in TSP? Oops. Well, there's 5 core funds. And we have a total of 15 funds, but those extra 10 funds are L funds. And we'll get to those in just a second. But of course, the L funds are a combination of these 5 core funds. Participants can use any mix of the 15 funds in any way. Now, typically, you would look at these 5 core funds and create a portfolio and decide how you want to balance or redistribute or rebalance as time goes on. You have some sort of investment strategy or what have you. With the 10 L funds, you will let them do their thing, and I'll explain that a little bit further in just a second. But the L funds are sort of where you choose the target date fund and you let it do its thing. And typically, folks theoretically will use one side or the other. But does that mean I have to use just one side or the other? No, I could use one of the L funds. I could use a combination of one of the L funds and maybe some of the core funds. And once again, this gets back to various strategies out there. So I'm going to stick to the basics and the theory behind how these funds work and how they're available to you. All right, somebody's saying they can't hear, but hopefully I'm coming through well enough for everyone to hear. All right, here's a question. Says, what does the total 58 include? So the 58,000 is the annual addition. I mean, the annual additions limit. So the annual additions limit includes the money that you put in under the 19,500. It includes any agency or service money. So the match, the 1%. If you are a service member, there's also additional funds that they can put in from incentive pay, special pay, and bonus pay. So it's sort of like that catch-all amount, that umbrella amount that catches all that. It does not include, like I said before, ironically, the catch-up contribution, the 6,500. So the 6,500 is on top of the 58,000. And as I mentioned before, You know, for most of us, we really don't have to pay that much attention to it. It's not something that bothers us. Now, if I were to participate in a similar plan in the private sector in the same year and contribute to TSP, then things can get a little bit different there too. All right. Can you contribute to a TSP Roth and an outside Roth? We answered that one earlier. The answer will be yes. That is doable. Where can you find out more information regarding permanent disabilities? And I think, the permanent disabilities would be, I think I'm hitting the wrong publish buttons here. Sorry about that. It's based off the Social Security definition of disability, if I remember correctly. So I mean, you can look, this is a tax issue, so it's an IRS issue. I've never looked on IRS's website, but you could look up there also to find more information about Roth qualified earnings, or you could put in Roth qualified distributions, because it would be considered a qualified distribution and or qualified earnings. And that's just one of those two conditions. Of course, there's the 5-year rule, and then the other one is 59 and a half, disabled or deceased. I think I was hitting the wrong. Here's a good question right here that I just it says on the IRA limit screen, should the MFS in 0, the table shows 10,000. No, the 10,000 is correct. So that's married filing single. So married filing single is 0 to 10,000. That is the correct number. It shouldn't be 100,000. So the two levels, of course, married filing joint, married filing single, and the all others. Not sure how to answer. There's some questions on here about how to get credit for attending and so forth. That's a little bit out of my wheelhouse here. For that, I'll let the folks with OPM let you know on that. So here's a question, and this, like I said earlier, we get a lot of these type of questions with Roth. How much does an agency match for Roth? The matching for Roth is the same exact as it is traditional. So when you're talking about the agency or service matching, it doesn't matter what the type of money is. It's only looking for the amount. So it's only looking to see how much, based off of basic pay, did the participant contribute in that pay period between traditional and Roth. So let's just do a quick little example. Let's just say I was contributing 3% traditional and 2% Roth. That gives me a full 5%, which means I'm going to get my full 4% match. So I'm good there. Now, if I'm doing this as a dollar figure, then of course the system will calculate to see what those percentages are. But it could be all Roth. So that 5% could be all Roth contributions. I'll get my full 4% match and then my 1%. So don't get too bogged down on Roth being different when it comes to the match. The match is still going to be the same amounts, and the matching is based off of your basic pay. So basic pay for most of us is pretty simple. You've got law enforcement positions that have premium pay and that sort of stuff that is included, so it gets a little bit more complicated over there. But it's based off of basic pay. So first, they're looking to see how much you're contributing. What does that equate to in your basic pay? And then they get the match based off of whatever your basic pay is. So here's a question. I think I need clarification. If someone hits their 19.5 max for regular TSP, the catch-up contributions still get the matching from the agency. That's correct. So that, when I reach 19.5, then I continue to contribute and it will go into the catch-up portion of my account, and I will get matching based off of those catch-up contributions. It's a bit of a change if you've been around for a while, and it takes some getting used to, because we're probably getting to that point for the first time ever this time of year, where participants are going to tend to start reaching the limit, the 19.5, and the money will go into the catch-up portion if you're on that schedule. So here's an interesting question, and we get these sometimes. I have an employee who wants to contribute $19,500 per pay period. I'm just going to end the question right there because no one makes that much in the federal government. So I'm not sure why they would want to contribute $19,500 per pay period. So it's not possible. No one in the federal government makes that kind of money for $19,500 per pay period. Now what you can do, if somebody wants to increase the amounts and contribute $1,000 a pay period or even more, you can contribute larger amounts and reach the limits sooner. But that you want to be careful with that. The important part there is not to reach the limit too soon, where you can miss out on the matching in those years. So if they just want to reach the 19.5 at the end of the year, then they're going to have to divide by number of pay periods, make that their election, or in this case, we're already in August, so they'd have to go in and adjust if they think they're on a path to reach the limit too soon. So 19,500, this is a good question here. Is the 19,500 a total of all accounts? For example, someone that has both a civilian and a service account. It is. So the total is 19,500. Here's a good question. My son is in the Army and has TSP. What happens if and when he gets out in 6 years? Well, one of the nice things, and I tell service members this all the time, many service members they don't reach the 20 years. This is not their career forever. They don't even work for the federal government. But what they can do is keep the money in their TSP and benefit from TSP's low cost in the plan for the rest of their lives. So in other words, they can just leave the money and let it grow, and then they go work for somebody in the private sector, and they can put money into, say, a 401k, or maybe they put money into traditional IRAs. Maybe they work for a city or a state government, and they can move those plans, those 403Bs, 457 plans, into TSP. So later on, when they leave that employer, later on they can move that money. And we live in that world where we work for multiple employers more often, or at least the younger generations probably will. And they can dump that money in from those other plans along the way and take advantage of TSP's low cost for the rest of their life. So they don't have to take the money out if they were to leave service under those circumstances. So how are TSP withdrawals taxed? So I'll give you a quick answer to that one. TSP is taxed as ordinary income. It is included with other income for the year, but it's considered ordinary income. It used to be earned income, but you put that into TSP, and now it's going to be considered ordinary income, and when you take it out, so it'll be taxed that way. Here's a few questions about death benefits, or at least a question. If an employee passes away, can the beneficiary roll the TSP amount into an outside 401k? Well, what happens is the beneficiary will have two choices. So say you're leaving this for your children or relatives or a friend or whatever the case is. Will either have the choice of receiving it as a lump sum, or they could set up an inherited IRA and make a transfer to the inherited IRA at a financial institution, or they can do a little bit of both. So they'll have those two options, but they do have to take the money out. This is a good question from Sam here that says, in regards to the annual addition limit, can that include contributions rolled over or transferred from other eligible plans? It does not. So the amounts that you're going to well, I shouldn't say it that way so specifically. In most cases, those are funds that you have contributed to plans in previous years under previous limits. So it could be $1 million that you're transferring into TSP. It could be a case where you worked for a private company and you put money into their plan in this current year, and you're putting money into TSP this year. So, in those rare cases, it could be part of that could be considered for this year, and you would have to consider that as part of the limits. But in most cases, you're moving it from previous years, and the limits can come from multiple plans. It can come from a large amount. It can be a large amount, $1 million or something like that you're transferring in. So here's a question I'm going to answer. Just keep in mind, traditional contributions you will pay taxes on when you separate from service. I mean, when you take the money out, later on you separate from service, you take out withdrawals, you'll pay taxes on those funds when you take it out. And now you could do an in-service withdrawal like an age-based or a hardship or something like that you'll end up paying taxes on up front also. All right, let me get back to the funds for a little bit here. So you have the 5 core funds. I'll come back to questions later on. 5 core funds here being the G, F, CS, and I. So the G and the F are more fixed income funds. We're all familiar with the G. That's the safe fund where everyone runs to if they want to be safe in the account, as they call it. But careful with the G fund, though. The G fund is not always going to get you to those higher rates of return and account for inflation and taxes as you hope it does. So it's something that you can use as part of your portfolio, but the more time you have before you're going to use these funds, probably the less you're going to have in that G fund. The F fund is a little bit more aggressive than the G fund, but not quite as aggressive as the 3 stock funds, the CS and I. The F fund being a bond fund, and you can see the benchmarks here for the F, C, S, and I. Now we manage the G fund in-house. These are Treasury securities specially issued just for TSP participants. The F fund, the F, CS, and I funds all have a benchmark. Now we are a share-based plan, of course, and the shares in the funds are what you have, and those funds are invested out in the markets based off of the benchmarks. So the F fund is benchmarked as the Bloomberg Barclays U.S. Aggregate Bond Index. There's no junk bonds in this. These are all BBB rated and above. And in fact, most of this is AAA rated type of bonds. Then, of course, you have your 3 stock funds. These are your aggressive funds. This is where the big earnings potential lies, but it also takes on the higher levels of risk. The C fund is tracking the S&P 500, and that is 500 or so large equities traded in the U.S. markets that represent 22 different. I'm not 22. The 11 major industry sectors. The S fund is small and medium-sized funds, and it's a completion index, as you can see right there, Dow Jones U.S. Completion Total Stock Market Index. And basically why it's completion index, it doesn't include the S&P 500. You can sort of put the C and the S together and cover the majority, the overwhelming majority of the U.S. markets, high 90% coverage there. So this is a Dow Jones index, and this is the U.S. Completion Total Stock Market Index there. The I fund, the I is international markets. The I fund is currently only developed markets. It does not include Canada or the U.S., but it includes about 21 different developed markets around the world, and that is mainly Japan and the UK, but also things like Australia, New Zealand, and Hong Kong, and France and so forth are included in there. And this is tracking the Morgan Stanley's Capital International, what's called an EFA index. And EFA just simply stands for Europe, Australasia, and the Far East. So this gives you exposure to developed markets around the world outside of the US and Canada. It does not include emerging markets, but it also has an additional risk. In addition to market risk, it has currency risk. So the value of the US dollar plays a role in this I fund. So you can see as I'm going through these 5 core funds how well diversified you can be in the coverage that you can have just within those 5 core funds. So the L funds that we introduced way back in 2005, and we have changed over the years, now include the 5-year increments, and they take those 5 core funds and give you a portfolio. Further out you are towards a certain target date, the more that you're going to have in the CS&I funds, and the slower the process is that you move towards the conservative. So you're moving down what's called a glide path from high risk, high reward posture into a more conservative posture, which in TSP means you're moving from CS&I towards the G and the F, mainly the G. And that's what the L funds automatically do for you. They automatically reallocate every quarter towards that certain target date. Now, for instance, if you're looking at, say, the L2065, now these are targeted for when you would turn 63. Now, I'm using the term target date. I think more importantly, you can look at these as what is your time horizon, and that really is when you're going to use your money. You might have a certain target date, but you might decide not to touch the money for another 5 or 10 years into retirement or something along those lines. So when you can truly use this money, start touching this money, that's your time horizon. But that's up to you which one to choose. Now, as you can see, there's the 5-year increments. Just for instance, right now, like this, if you're looking at the 2065, the 60, and the 55, they're really aggressive. They're on a very aggressive glide path, which right now currently would have them at 99% in the CS&I. So very aggressive in the 3 stock funds. And you can go on our website and look and see what those projections are for the different allocations into the future. Now, those aren't set in stone. We do audit these and look at these annually, and they can adjust if necessary. They've only made 2 slight adjustments over the years, and that had to do with the F fund slightly decreasing the amounts in the F fund due to anticipated inflation, which is now just sort of kicking in, it seems. But anyway, the L funds give you that automatic mix of the 5 core funds. And the closest you are to your target date, the more conservative you become. So it's moving from this posture of high risk, high reward down to a lower risk, but lower expected return posture in that sense. So that's exactly what's happening. It's moving down what they call the efficient frontier. And this efficient frontier, as you can see, it's a slower process further out you are, and then it starts to speed up incrementally moving forward. And if you go to our website, there are pie charts that you can go in and you can see what those projections are way out into the future for each one of these funds. Now, the L income fund is not going to reallocate any further because each one of these L funds is actually working its way to becoming the L income fund. So that's basically what they're doing. And this is where a person, like I said, would be using their money right around that time. All right, a couple other terms I wanted to put out here for you. The contribution allocation and the contribution, the interfund transfer, I should say. The contribution allocation is something, these are two terms, and I've been around this plan, dealing with this plan since 1993 myself. I used to, many years ago down at NFC, I used to process the IFT forms, the TSP 50s way back in the day. So I've been around for a long time. And believe you me, people have struggled with these two terms all of those years. And I try to stress participants, just look at it this way. The contribution allocation, these two terms are things that you're dealing with directly with your TSP account. So the contribution allocation is simply the future money. Where do you want the future money going into your account to go? And the interfund transfer is current money. I want to move my current balances around. I want to redistribute, rebalance them for whatever reason. I want to move the money already in my account around, so current money. You have one contribution allocation on file at all time, and it only changes if you go in as a participant and change it. It's just sitting there waiting for money to come in. And that can be contributions, that can be agency money, service money, loan repayments, transfers and rollovers. Anytime money's coming in, the system will say, hey, this participant has 100% L25, 2025, and that's where it goes, 100%. So the allocation that you have on file, you can change it as often as you like, but it's simply just sitting there waiting for future money to come into your account. The interfund transfer is redistributing your current balance. Now, this is a one-time deal. It happens, and then you can elect another one in the future. You can do these things via the Thrift line, or you can go into your account. I mean, you can do it over the phone, the Thrift line, or you can go into your account and do it on at tsp.gov in your account. Now, ordinarily, if you get this in prior to 12 noon Eastern time on a business day, it will take effect that day. But don't try getting there right before 12 noon at 11:59 and hit submit. It doesn't always meet the cutoff at that point. There is a limit. So back to current money or the IFT, there's a limit of IFTs that you can do, and that's 2 per month, any way you'd like. Each month after the second one, you're done, except for the fact that you can move money back to the G fund. So there is a built safe haven rule into this. So it's built into it. And we're just showing you a quick little simple example. A person starts the month out at 20% G and 80% L. And they decide they want to move it all back to the G. They used one move. And then say a week later, they do another one and they move the money to the C, S, and I and leave 10% in the G. Well, they've used their second move. They're done for the month, but they can move money back to the G, but only in that direction. So this person in this scenario did actually that twice, but they only were able to move money back towards the G fund after that second move. And quite frankly, that's 24 open moves plus moves to the G fund. And that is way more than any participant ever really needs in a plan like this. Anyone who's using that many is probably trying to chase market returns and do things that you just simply, this plan is not designed to do in terms of day trading and things like that. I can give you story after story of accounts I've dealt with over the years where people try to do that sort of stuff and they do more harm than good in most cases. And like I said earlier, lots of resources on our website. You can just put in tsp.gov/forms. There are a lot of fun resources, booklets. We do a good booklet, very good booklet each year. A fun, we call them, well, they're fun sheets, and it makes up a fun booklet. That a participant go in there. We update that every year sometime in the spring around April or so. But this is just a few of the items that are listed there that you'll find out there. All right, I'll just leave this up for a second here. We got plenty of time. Let me grab some questions. And we'll grab some more of the information on the slides in a bit. I do see there's some questions here and there that are a little bit off of outside of my swim lane, to be quite honest with you, as far as sessions for specialists and things of that nature. So I will leave those alone. So here's a question about, says you stated that moving forward, the employee doesn't need to make new elections each year if they would like to continue with their current selections. If they have maxed their regular and catch up, will it automatically adjust if the IRS limits increase, or does the employee need to make a new election each time? So that's a terrific question. The employee would have to go in and adjust for that. So as I mentioned earlier, let's just keep it simple. And you had $1,000 a month. $1,000 a month. I don't know, I keep saying that today. $1,000 a pay period, and you're on a 26 pay period schedule. And let's just say next year you're still on 26 pay period schedule, and the numbers stay the same. Well, you can just roll into next year and keep it at $1,000. You're good to go. But what if they each go up by, say, $500 next year? Well, that's another $1,000. Well, you're going to want to adjust. It's not going to be a big adjustment, but you'll have to do a slight adjustment to that $1,000 per pay period. And that's what the calculator on our website will help you with that. So once we announce those, well, not we announce those, once IRS announces those limits, and we pass those along, the participant will know what those limits are well before any changes need to be made at the end of the year or the beginning of next year. So they'll know what the limits are going to be like next year. But they will have to your question, they will have to go in and make the adjustment themselves. See if I can grab some different questions here. Are new employees automatically enrolled? They are. So new employees are automatically enrolled. Right now it's at the 5% level, and you have that window of 90 days to opt out and get receive a refund of the amounts that you contributed prior to up to opting out. Now, I'm happy to say that automatic enrollment works. I think our numbers are somewhere around 96, 97%, or maybe even higher, that actually stay in the plan and even increase what they contribute. And that's not just in TSP, that's in private sector plans too. So automatic enrollment works. So there's not many people who actually opt out. That doesn't mean they can't contribute. They just opted out and they have to go back in and restart their contributions and so forth. So there's another question on, well, let me skip some. So a question about signatures on the real estate contracts. So as far as I know, we're not accepting electronic signatures at this time, whether or not anything like that changes in the future. So yeah, that's a processing thing. That's how they are processed, and we can't accept the electronic signatures. So I don't know what the new vendors we're bringing on board and so forth, what that holds for our future and those sort of processes and things of that nature. I would, we'll see what happens with that, but yeah, right now we on the forms you're going to need wet signatures and things of that nature. So I knew I would get this question, so I'll go ahead and address it now. Hopefully, we won't get repeat question. But do you have any comment about the recent news of the government using G funds? I'm not going to make a comment. I'll just let you know that that's actually not what's happening. So what happens with the debt ceiling is the debt ceiling with our G fund, those are government securities. So the Treasury Secretary cannot reinvest the earnings on the G fund shares. That would violate the debt ceiling. So what happened was way back in 1987, they passed a law to protect the G fund. So that there is a make whole provision, if you will, that was passed way back in 1987 that protects the G fund and forces the Treasury Secretary to reinvest those funds or invest those funds as if they were going in there all along when the debt ceiling is addressed. What you see on your account, if you take out a loan or a withdrawal or you look at your account balance, is as if those monies were going in there all along. This happens a lot. In fact, I think it's happened something like 30 times since 1987 or something along those lines. It happens quite often. So basically that's what's happening. So they're not using the funds. They cannot touch your funds and use them for anything. They're held in trust with the U.S. government. So they cannot go in there and use that money. They're just not able to reinvest the earnings on those G funds, as I said. So here's a good question. I'm going to address this question because I don't want anyone to get confused. Where it says on some of the slides about the TSP1 or the U1 forms, those are some rare cases where some folks might have to start out with a paper form and then go into electronic system. I would venture to guess most of that has been changed over recent years, over the last 5-10 years or so, but some participants may have to use a paper form, a TSP1 or U1 at some point, maybe not completely all the time, but maybe just to get started. So if a person is automatically enrolled, then they don't have to worry about the U1 or the TSP1. They are already automatically enrolled. So like I said, those are rare cases these days that they would be using that to start out with. If an agency still uses those paper forms for, there's the U1 or the TSP1 for changes, then they'll have to use that for those changes. But the automatic enrollment, if you're automatically enrolled, you don't have to do a second process or anything like that, to your question. Here's an interesting question. If a contractor has funds in an IRA and has accepted a federal position, can the funds be transferred to TSP? So if it's a traditional IRA, the answer is yes. If it's a simple or a SEP or even an employer plan, as I mentioned earlier, 401ks, 457, 403bs, those can all be transferred in. In fact, that's where they're coming from. They're coming from private sector plans, from previous employment outside of TSP, and that's where they're moving that money from. So yes, a traditional IRA can be moved in. The only thing you can't move into your TSP as far as IRAs go would be a Roth IRA, an inherited IRA, or an education IRA. Those cannot be transferred into TSP. I'm just going over a few things here. It looks like somebody was. Go back. Guess I'm just doing a little bit of housekeeping here. So there's a few questions here and there about, oh no, I think I addressed that already. Here's a good question. It says, if a retiree is 62 years old and retired, the retiree may convert the balance into a Roth IRA and pay tax on the balance. Does the retiree have to wait until the age of 67 to pull the money from the Roth in order for their funds to be tax-free? What happens if the retiree pulls the money out of Roth at age 54? Well, I guess the simple answer to your question is yes. The Roth IRA is going to have a 5-year rule and things of that nature. So you're going to have to follow those, meet those conditions in a Roth IRA also. So if somebody is moving their money out of TSP into a Roth IRA at 62, and they haven't had that Roth IRA for at least 5 years, then yeah, their 5-year rule would be starting right around that time as they set up that Roth IRA and put money into it and so forth. So yes, that is still going to apply to that participant or that retiree. All righty. Sorry about the delay here. I'm just trying to read some of the questions. It seems like some of these are duplicate or we already went over them. Let's see. It's a good question. I transferred funds from another qualified plan some years ago to TSP. Can I now request those funds to be transferred to Roth? Also, are federal and state taxes deducted from Roth? Okay, so can you transfer traditional money in your TSP over to the Roth side? That answer would be no, but maybe in the future. That's something called an in-plan conversion that we may implement sometime in the near future. So that's something that might change where you can move traditional money already in your account over to the Roth side in your account. Now, if the question is, can I move that money from TSP into an outside Roth, like say a Roth IRA, the answer is yes, you can do that also with some of the withdrawal options. You could do those transfers out. So one of them's a no, and one of them's is a yes. As far as taxes go, we withhold. Now, when money comes into TSP, your taxes for the Roth contributions are going to be, that's all something that's handled outside of TSP. So that's your payroll office who is handling withholding for federal or state taxes or city taxes for that matter. So you'd have to address that with your payroll office. They're the ones who handle withholding from Roth contributions that come in. And it's not really a withholding. I shouldn't say it that way. I take that back. The withholding is when you take the money out of TSP. So when the funds are coming into TSP, what's happening there is, and I'm sorry about that, I got a little twisted around. I'm trying to answer multiple questions in different areas here. It gets me a little bit, I'm sorry, I do apologize for that. So let me just put it this way. Let me make it easy. Let's just say I'm contributing $500 a pay period and I want that to be Roth contributions. Well, $500 is going into your TSP account. The difference between Roth and traditional with that $500 is on the traditional side of things, they're going to deduct the $500 from your adjusted gross income to determine what you owe in taxes that year. On the Roth side of things, that $500, same amount's going to go into your account. So $500 is still going into TSP, but the $500 stays as a part of your adjusted gross income. So it stays a part of your income. So that in turn determines your levels of marginal tax rates and other items that are affected by that, by income levels. So don't think about it so much as the deduction for taxes coming out of the contribution into TSP for Roth. You're just keeping that amount that you're putting into TSP within the amount of taxable income for the year. Whereas on traditional, you're removing it and deferring it into TSP. Sorry about that confusion there. Here's a good question. Do withdrawals from TSP affect the first special supplement since TSP withdrawals are taxed as earnings? Well, they're not taxed as earnings. So let me just make sure that's what we said a little bit earlier. The withdrawals that come out of your TSP are going to be taxed as ordinary income. They're not taxed as earned income. So the amount you take out of TSP will not affect the FERS special supplement. It also doesn't affect Social Security when you get into those years, because the amounts that you're taking out of TSP, once again, are taxed as ordinary income. What affects your FERS special supplement or the Social Security is earned income. So the two terms there are earned income or ordinary income. Good questions. You guys are keeping me on my toes. I can say that much right now. Some of these questions that I don't typically get from participants. All right, let me just scroll down here and see if there's some more questions down here. So let me make, I do see these questions are still popping up here with Roth. And let me just make it real clear. So hopefully everybody listening attentively here. The Roth contributions do receive matching. So Roth contributions will receive matching. So Roth contributions can receive matching. The difference is traditional, the agency and service money, the match and the 1% goes into your account as a traditional contribution, even though it may be based off of those Roth contributions. We had a couple other questions in here too in that sort of area. Can a person leave the agency and transfer funds into a 401k? Yes. So on the forms, the various types of withdrawals offer you the ability to transfer or roll over funds from TSP. Not every withdrawal option. So a hardship withdrawal is not something you can transfer. Age-based in-service withdrawals, post-service lump sum single withdrawals, or your some of the installment payment options can be transferred into other plans and so forth. So 401ks can be where you're transferring to. Here's a really good question. If you go over the limit, do we get penalized? And the answer is you won't go over the limit in TSP's system. Your payroll office on rare occasions might take out a little bit more on that last pay period, but our system will reject that and you'll get a refund of that difference from your payroll. So our system is set to not accept above the limits. All righty. Here's a good question. Why are my questions not showing in featured questions, therefore not getting answered? Well, I'm trying to answer as many as I can. I have 127 questions in the queue here. So as I'm going through and reading, there's a lot of duplicate questions. So I'm just trying to get to as many as I can here. So as soon as we can get to them, we will. And maybe not get to every single question in the queue at that. All right, so we had a question like this earlier about beneficiaries and what they can do. So this question asks us if an employee passes away, can the beneficiary roll the TSP amount into an outside 401k? They cannot. They can take it as a lump sum, or they can transfer it and set up an inherited IRA at the time, or they can do a little bit of both of that. Is the automatic 1% received if no contributions are made? Yes, the 1%, and that's why they call it automatic, goes in no matter what. It's going to go in each pay period. Even if you're not contributing or you reach the limits, it will still go into your account. That's a separate amount. It's automatic. Can employees roll over their military TSP into civilian TSP? They can, but they don't have to. And the form they would use for this is a TSP 65. They have to be fully separated from one side or both. So if I was separated from my civilian account, if I was separated from my service account and I wanted to move that money into my civilian account, I could be active or separated, it doesn't matter. I have to be separated from the side I'm moving from. Now, the service money, if that includes tax exempt money, the tax exempt portion cannot go to your civilian account. The rest of it can. Now, there are pros and cons here. There's pros to leaving them separate because you have all of your post-service withdrawal options if you were separated on one side. If you combine those into an active account where you're still actively employed, then you would lose all those post-service options. So you wouldn't be able to do those sort of things. Now, on the other hand, if I was much old, if I was reaching the RMD limit, RMD amounts at age 72, and I didn't want to have to make those distributions, then I could move that money out of my separated account into my active account if I was still working at that age. So there's some pros and cons both ways, depending on when you're looking at this as to whether you want to combine them or not. I think if I had two accounts, I would keep them separated for the most part because I have more options that way. I have more, more balls in the air, so to speak, to move with those accounts. So here's a question from William. If a person were to retire or leave during the year they turned 55, but not 59 and a half, does that person just draw from the traditional portion of the TSP? Well, they can. And that's really what that allows a person to do with our new change to our pro rata rule is you can now target the traditional money first, and then maybe in your scenario later on start targeting the Roth money once you get that second condition for the Roth qualified earnings. Here's a question about the taxable income with Roth IRAs. I can't speak to that too much other than, so this question is asking about if I contribute the max 19.5 in my TSP, which lowers my taxable income, and that's a smart move if you're intending to be able to contribute to a Roth IRA outside, but this person is expecting a promotion that might put them above the limits. So it just depends. I would say that, you're talking about potentially putting 19,500 into TSP as traditional and then doing a Roth IRA that you might not be eligible for. So yeah, the 19.5 is going to lower if it goes in traditional. It's going to lower your adjusted gross income, which might improve your ability to put money in a Roth IRA. But in turn, you mentioned that you might get a raise that will increase your salary during the year. Is it going to increase it that much that makes you no longer eligible completely for the Roth IRA? Or maybe you can still do a portion of the limits in a Roth IRA. That's maybe possible there also. Here's a question. I haven't dealt with a lot of this. We don't deal with as much these days as trainers, but this is sort of an error correction, back pay award kind of question here. Do you know if an employee is removed and then reinstated, can TSP catch-ups be part of the back pay benefit elections? So yes, sometimes when when an employee is removed and then reinstated, part of the reinstatement is they can make up payments, or they get a back pay award, and they will have to make any kind of contributions that they can make have to come out of the back pay award first. So that's the key there. Now, if the back pay award isn't enough to cover what they can, make up for, then they could make up from future contributions too, from future pay too, I should say. So depending on the situation, yes, the simple answer is catch up. It's not really catch up contributions. It's just make up contributions from previous years, previous pay periods that will have to come out of the back pay first. So somebody contributes. Here's another question. Quite a few questions about the elected deferral and the Roth IRA outside. If a person reaches the 19,500, that in and of itself does not mean they cannot contribute to a Roth IRA outside. The only thing that's going to prevent a person from contributing to a Roth IRA outside would be the income limits, and that is based off of the adjusted gross income. All right, let me just go through one more little bit here and some resources, and then we'll come back and grab some more questions. So the cost of investing with TSP. TSP's gross admin expenses provide the operating budget. In other words, that's what pays the bills for TSP. We are a non-appropriated agency. So the net administrative fee is also offset by forfeitures and loan fees. So I'll just get to the slide here. Now this is the expense ratio. So the expense ratio, as you can see right here, we express this as the net expense ratio, which is what private sector plans will do too. That's the industry standard. And you can see each one of these funds has an individual expense ratio. The average across the board was 0.049% last year, or 49 cents for every $1,000 you had in the plan. Now you can see a few of these. The L income fund was 47 cents and the F fund was 48 cents. The average across the board was 49 cents. To put that in perspective, an average 401k in a private sector plan, which is not 100% apples to apples, I understand that, but in an average 401k, it was probably closer to $2, somewhere in the $1.50 to $2 range or something like that. Last year, and it's not uncommon to find plans that are even much higher than even $2 for every $1,000. So we have a good low cost plan, but this is the breakdown of the expense of the cost of investing in TSP. What does that mean ultimately for a participant? Well, it means it's going to eat up less of your account. And you don't have to get too bogged down in the numbers per se here. Just think about the theory of what's happening here. So the effect of TSP's expenses on just a 10-year period compared to, say, an average 401k, and that right here in this calculation is about a $13,000 difference over 10 years. But what if we stretch this out over a longer period of time as you're building that account and building that account? Over a 30-year period, that goes all the way up to 121,000 and change difference in cost. So that's a pretty big difference there. That's, I don't know, what are you getting for $121,000 that you're not getting in TSP, I guess is the question you want to really ask yourself. So the cost of a plan can really eat up a big chunk of your account. So you want to know, why am I paying more for this? So bottom line is try and take advantage of your TSP as much as possible. And then you can think about investing in other sources outside of TSP, but that's up to you, the participant, what you want to do. The nice thing we have is we have a very low cost plan in TSP. So what if I want to know more? Randy has not answered all my questions and has not answered it fully, or I don't remember exactly what was said. Well, we have lots of resources. So if you want to grab one of the many books or, like I said, fact sheets, tax notices, we have a series of tax notices that are very helpful. Lots of good Q&A portions and charts and so forth. And then, of course, so go to tsp.gov/forms. You can attend another one of our webinars, our courses or something. They're, like I said, open to the public, and anyone can join and listen in as often as you'd like, and maybe listen to a different trainer, get a different perspective than just mine on some of these. So tsp.gov/webinars. You can also call, go to our website, tsp.gov, and follow up on other resources. You can call our Thrift line, the call centers, the TSP Thrift line, and so forth for that. If you want to give me some feedback, this is a survey that we have. You can jot down this survey link. It's not a clickable link. You could use the QR code if you wanted to, and just give us some feedback on that. So let me see if I can grab some more of these questions that are in here. So here's a question that says, if an employee passes away, does the benefactor pay taxes in the traditional if the employee was not vested in the match? Well, a few things about that. Would beneficiaries, an account that is still has vesting requirements and haven't satisfied that, would become automatically vested due to deceased participant. So you're going to be leaving money from that account. Now, in terms of taxes, traditional and Roth, yes, you could be leaving money in the traditional side that they will have taxes on. The Roth side, the contribution itself has already been taxed, and it depends on the earnings whether that participant had met the two conditions, which in this case would be just simply the 5-year rule, and being deceased would be the second condition. So yes, the bottom line is there can be taxes owed for these accounts when left to a beneficiary, and it can depend on what type of money is being left, because you could even have tax exempt pay from uniformed services members on the traditional side in an account that's left to somebody that wouldn't be taxed too. So I do see some more questions here about the 5-year rule and kind of conversions and so forth. So this question is asking about, doing something like this at the age of 59, if we implement an in-plan conversion option and somebody wants to convert money over to the Roth side. Now, you could start Roth contributions now. Now, maybe you're already separated at that point or something like that, and you can't do Roth contributions. But yes, anytime you're moving money into a Roth, or creating a Roth, when you create the Roth, you have to put money into the account. So that's when the 5-year rules will start kicking in. So if you're doing in-plan conversions or anything like that, you'd have to have that account set up. I want to get too off into tangents on this because some of these questions are getting a little bit off into more. We'd have to spend some time discussing all the details. I do, folks, and I'm having some difficulty with some of the questions. I don't want to overlook question, but some of the questions have some major inaccuracies in them, and I don't want to confuse folks. And some of them, the wording isn't very. It's hard to understand what the participant is trying to ask here. So. how will the G fund work if the debt ceiling isn't raised? Well, then we won't pay our bills, and we won't. That'll be a bigger fish to fry. That I'm quite sure they'll deal with that in some way pretty quickly. I think the money will just not be reinvested until they deal with it. I mean, if they never dealt with it, then it's highly unlikely. I'll just leave it at that. Here's a really good question in terms of, I want to answer this one. The question is basically says, if the market were to crash, would I be wise to save my earnings by moving all contributions into the G fund? Now think about what that says. If the market crashes and you take that crash along with the market and you're in, say, the CS&I funds or whatever, CNS, so basically you're taking that roller coaster ride down, and now you're going down, you've lost value in your shares. So are you going to use that money right now? Is that, do you need that money right now? In which case, maybe you shouldn't have been in that much of a risk posture to begin with, but that's up to you, of course. Now, what happens is many folks will do exactly what you're saying, and the question is, the markets are crashing, I got to get out. Well, typically people will ride that roller coaster down just a little bit further, and eventually, if you get out, you're locking in losses. So you're selling low. And what many people will do in those cases is they'll wait too long to get back in. So they'll compound that mistake by selling low and then buying higher. They'll wait till the markets recover. They'll wait till they get better and like, I got to get back in. Well, then why did you get out in the first place? Why didn't you just ride the roller coaster all the way down? Now, once again, like I said, if you're going to use the money, that's a different case, and that's up to whether you need the money at that time. It's all about being able to recover from a dip like that. It's all about having the time to recover and ride it out and stay the course. Because otherwise, like I said, you're locking in losses during that period. And we can go back to what happened last year in March or so, and a lot of people did exactly that and harmed themselves. You can go back to 2008 and the crash back then. A lot of people did the same thing. They took the big hit, they lost a lot of value in their account, and they moved money out and locked in the losses and waited for the markets to recover, which they did pretty soon after that, which is the same thing that happened last year. The markets recovered. And last year was a very positive year. If you just stayed the course in 2020 in TSP, you had returns close to 32% in the S fund, close to 19% in the C fund, a very, very positive year if you just rode it out. So you got to be careful with trying to run to the G fund when the markets take a dip. It's all about timing, and that's where the difficulty lies, is knowing when to time these things. So that's why plans like TSP are more built for you to ride that out, to stay the course and ride it out. It's more of a long-term strategy and not reacting to immediate market changes and things like that. Now, granted, we didn't know the markets would recover that quickly last year, but typically markets do recover. And this gets back to the time frame and the ability to ride these out. Here's a good question. Is the percentage you elect only from your base pay, or is it your locality pay included? So it's basic pay and based off of locality, of course. So the basic pay for that would be included. Let me just fast forward here to some of these questions. I only have quite a few questions. We're up to 155 in the queue. Here's a good question. Does the 3-year vesting requirement start over when a participant transfers to another agency? No. So, and that's a good question in that the 3-year vesting, once you receive, now if you had a break in service, So if a person has a break in service and they have to do a recalculated TSP SCD date, that's one thing. So they'll have to bring those the time frame forward by doing the recalculated TSP SCD date. So you don't lose the time, the credit for the time. But if a person is already vested, they already have the 3-year vesting under their belt, you're vested for life. So if you have it, you're vested for life. If you don't, then they'll do a recalc and you have a break in service of more than 31 days, then they'll do a recalculated TSP SCD date. Here's a question that says, when an employee is getting ready to retire, should they do an interfund transfer to the G fund? Well, think about what you're talking about here, where you're getting into retirement and you're going to start to withdraw. Now, you could end up living for 20, 30, 40 years in retirement where you're, say, getting monthly payments from your TSP. So you're still invested in the plan. Should you be 100% in the G fund in your retirement years? Probably not. That's up for you to decide. I can't give that advice. But think about it in terms of the G fund is not always keeping up with inflation and taxes, so you still want some level. If a person wanted to go 100% G fund in retirement, that's up to them. But even if you look at our L funds, even in the L fund, say the L income fund, that's only 74%, going to be 74% in the G fund. So even that right there is telling you you probably shouldn't be 100% G fund in retirement, but that's up to you. That's, I can't tell you what to do. But I don't know if I would rush to move all my money to the G fund once I retire. I might consider, if that's the case, you might consider one of the L funds, maybe if depending on what your age is and so forth, one of those L funds might work best for you, or even just the L income fund at that. Here's a question about my name. My name is Randy Urban, Urban. Probably has to do with the survey that's up there. It asks my name. Where does the matching go? The matching and any agency or service money always goes to the traditional side of your account, of the traditional bucket, if you will, of your account. Here's a question about TSP loans and death cases. So if a federal employee passes and has a TSP loan, does the family have the option to pay the loan, or does it get reported as earned income to the IRS? So you cannot pay the loan. So once we're notified of a deceased participant, that would make it an automatic taxable distribution for that amount. So you can't pay any more on, you wouldn't be able to continue making payments on that or anything like that. So that money's already out of TSP, so that becomes an automatic taxable distribution for that amount. Here's a question. Can you explain the TSP SCD when or how that can change? So the TSP service computation date includes all service. So, but if you have a break in service of more than 31 days, say, you're switching agencies and you leave and come back a year later or something like that, then the gaining agency will have to do a recalculated TSP SCD date and basically bring, say you had 2.5 years of service, bring that 2.5 years of service forward and give you a new TSP SCD date. And that can change every time you make have a break in service of more than 31 days. So here's a good question. I'll answer it this way. It's asking, is there a penalty if one takes money out of a Roth IRA prior to 5 years? And I'll answer that question really in terms of both your TSP and Roth and a TSP outside, not TSP outside, a Roth IRA, as you put it in the question. So Roth earnings are what we're focusing on here. The Roth earnings can potentially be taxed if you haven't met the conditions, and they also have the possibility of an early withdrawal penalty under some circumstances with IRS early withdrawal penalty rules. So you could run into that as a penalty, but not meeting the 5-year rule is not a penalty. So I'll leave it at that. So not meeting the 5-year rule does not make it a penalty. It just means you don't have one of the conditions for that to be qualified, and you'll owe taxes on that money. Can you owe additional penalty on that? Yes, possibly. I'm a new employee. How do I access my TSP account? So depending how new you are, if you just started, say, a pay period or so ago, you should receive from us a welcome packet, packet in the mail. And you'll also receive things like your account number, PIN numbers, and things of that nature in the mail. Now, if it's been a couple of months or something like that, then you might want to reach out to our Thrift line and call us up and see what's going on. But if you just started, you're probably still waiting on that welcome packet that's going to come to you, and the various items that you'll need to go into your account and start having access to your account. Now, a lot of this stuff has changed over the years. You're going to have to give us an email address, and there's the 2-step authentication and things of that nature for security for your account. So, but you should be receiving something from us, say if you just started last pay period or the pay period before, so any day now. But if it's been a while, you definitely want to give us a call on that Thrift line number and see what is going on with that. Here's a good question, and unfortunately, I can't really answer it. It would take some time for me to do that. Tyler's asking, can you break down the average rate of return over the 1, 3, 5, 10, and lifetime time frame? Now, that's a pretty broad question because, you're looking for the average rate of return for all of the funds or for specific funds. What I would say is if you go to our website, and let me just... see if I can bring this up real quick. If you go to our website and you just go to tsb.gov, if you go to, there's the fund performance, learn about the fund options, but under fund performance, you can look at the rates of return. You can look up the share price history. This will fill out in a second. So lots of different charts and stuff. So here's where you can find all the historical information on the rates of return on each one of the funds, 1 year, 3 year, 5, 10-year increments, 2021 year to date, each year to date, or each annual year, and so forth. So you can look and see what each month is. So the monthly rates of return and so forth. So all of this is laid out on our website under the fund performance at tsb.gov. There's also the share price history and so forth that is available to you and so forth. Now, these share prices are generally updated somewhere around 8 p.m. Eastern time on business days. So they should do that tonight, sometime around 8 p.m. They will update for today's new share prices. That's where all that information will be for you right there. I'll just leave that up for right now in case we have to go back to it. We have a little bit of time left here, about 8 minutes or so before we reach the 2-hour mark. Let me just grab some more questions here. Like I said, folks, unfortunately, I'm not going to get to every single question. I do apologize for that. Typically with large groups like this, you can't always get to every question. But there are those resources, like I said. So here's a question about the annuity and the cost of the annuities and how much is paid to the provider. Well, what they make out of it is based off of all the factors of what you're putting into the type of annuity you choose. So right now, of course, that's through MetLife. So your money leaves TSP and goes to MetLife if that's the one you're referring to. Now, what you're going to receive depends on the annuity interest rate, the type you choose, the features you choose, the amount of money you're using for that. All that goes into the formula. And then, of course, thrown in there also is, what MetLife is going to earn off of that. So that's all built into that formula. And it's not something that they, under the contract, disclose exactly what they make. So I think what the most concern about that would be the annuity interest rates that drives that, and the different type and features you're choosing. Here's a question from Patty. Says, my husband and I are both feds. If he is my beneficiary when I pass, can he transfer the inherited amount into his TSP, or does he have to transfer to the inherited IRA? And that's a terrific question. He will be able to, so if a person has both their regular TSP account and now he ends up with what's called a BPA account, a beneficiary participant account. Now, only spouses will have this type of an account. So he would end up with the BPA account and the regular TSP account. You can transfer the BPA account into your regular TSP account or leave them separate. Once again, if you transfer that money from the BPA into your regular TSP account, then it becomes part of your regular TSP money and those rules apply. If you leave them separate, then the rules for the BPA account, the withdrawal options and so forth, the RMD rules apply to that amount. So that's up to him, or that, whoever this is, any kind of spouse would be able to do this. So I did see a few questions here and there about reaching the limits. Once you reach the limits, the IRS limits that we went over earlier, you don't have to restart contributions anymore in any way. So if you reach the limit, say the 19.5, and you're not eligible for catch-up contributions, then that amount would just start up again next year. You don't have to restart it. I do see one question here about maxing out over the IRS annual. Okay, so that's the same thing. But yes, you wouldn't have to restart them. It would automatically roll into the next year and start up automatically. And with the changes to the catch up, that's the same over there also. All right, I think a lot of these we've gone over. I'm just sort of going through. A couple of questions in here about inheritance taxes, if you're leaving money to your children and so forth. yes, they will owe taxes on these funds, and inheritance taxes can vary from state by state and things of that nature. But yes, they will owe taxes on the fund. So that, that is maybe even more of an encouragement to put money in as a Roth. You could end up leaving qualified money in the Roth side into your, to your children or something along those lines if you wanted to. Did Congress suspend investments in the G fund? Yes, the reinvestments of the earnings on the G fund cannot be reinvested when the debt ceiling is reached. Here's a bit of a combination here question, and I'll read it just to confirm. These are the questions I get all the time. There is no salary limit in order to do a Roth and in TSP, of course. So TSP does not have income limits. In a Roth IRA, there are those income limits that we talked about earlier. And the other part of this, the other question here is asking the 59.5 tax rule is only if you're working. If you retire at MRA, you avoid the 59.5 tax. Well, the MRA doesn't in and of itself make you avoid it. The fact that you worked into the year that you turn 55 or older, separate and start withdrawals is what's giving you the exception to the penalty. So there is a list of exceptions to the IRS early withdrawal penalty, and that's what this is referring to. You will owe taxes on the money, but you won't owe the 10% penalty. So working to your MRA gets you into the year you turn 55 or older, and in turn gives you that exception. But the MRA itself, well, I'll leave it at that. All right, so it looks like we're right at 3 o'clock. I don't want to go too much over, and look, there's some duplicate questions in here. I've been kind of trying to scan through. Some of the questions here sort of go off into more specific questions, maybe for your HR, maybe for, there was a couple of questions in here, sort of look like healthcare questions and things like that. Sort of outside of my swim lane, if you will. But I will go ahead and wrap things up. And I do appreciate everyone for spending some time and all the terrific questions that were submitted. Just bring this up real quick. But I'll go ahead and wrap things up and wish everyone good luck with their TSP and good luck with dealing with participants if that's what you're doing. Take care, everyone. And my name is Randy Urban if you're filling out the survey. And have a great rest of your day. Have a great week coming up. Thank you, everyone.